Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. This is Jen Ross, your Agri-Tourist Podcast host. This is my 52nd episode, part 1. 1 whole year of podcast episodes. And I have to say that I learned so much during the course of this year. And not just about farming and agriculture. I learned so much about life, about love, about passion and dedication, trusting the journey, making every single day count, and about taking that leap of faith. And I learned all of this from over 50 amazing people from all over the world. So the next 2 consecutive episodes are dedicated to these amazing, inspirational, and passionate individuals who allowed me into their lives, their businesses, and to become a little part of their journey. Thank you for all you do. Join my trusted and dear friend Marisa and I for the next 2 weeks as we explore the last year together. So, Marisa, good evening. You're making me stay up at 9:30 at night when I'm usually in bed.
I'm a bad influence.
No, it's okay. I definitely wanted to do this interview because back on April 27, 2024, I published my very first podcast on the Agri-Tourist, my journey back to agriculture. So I cannot believe that it's been a year, almost a year, and I've published 1 episode every Monday morning at 5 a.m. for almost the last 52 weeks. Didn't miss a week. I was pretty impressed with myself. And I was usually ahead of the game, which was very impressive as well. And on, I think it was the 3rd episode, we did an interview. You interviewed me. I think it was on May 13th, actually. And we talked about, who I am, why I was doing this, and explored some of the things that were going on at the time, which, a lot has changed. So before we start talking about, I want to reflect a little bit on why I started this, just to set the stage on this interview. But Maris, why don't you tell everyone again, remind everyone who you are and the impactful person you are in my life. So go ahead.
Absolutely. So I like to always say that I've known Jen before I knew myself, which is true. Jen and my sister were best friends since they were 12. And when they were 14, I came onto the scene. So Jen has literally known me my whole life. We had memories of trick-or-treating when I was Big Bird, and Jen took me around.
3 years old.
Yes, how fast that's gone. And then into adulthood, for many, many years, about 20 years now, Jen and I collaborate very closely on community work. We are on the board of the Farmingville Historical Society together. We're both members of the Civic, Chamber of Commerce. We helped start the Chamber of Commerce together. And Jen introduced our neck of the woods, Farmingville, the name, no pun intended, to farming. Believe it or not, there has not been...
I never made that connection
Isn't
before.
That crazy?
Until recently.
You actually are who brought the Civic and things back into farming in Farmingville through your connection. So you brought for the farming back to Farmingville back in
Hey, that'll be my legacy, right?
Jennifer Ross brings farming back to Farmingville. And you did. And it's continuing to this day. Our youth Civic members run plots at a farm that Jen introduced them to the whole background of
Hobbs
it.
Farm.
Yep, Hobbs Farm. And they help feed local communities. These students learn about farming. And again, this introduction and this idea came from Jen's introduction, and the students love it. And some of them now even want to go on to college and do things in that industry. So we work very closely together on many different things. And it's exciting to know Jen on both a business and community volunteering level and a personal level, and watching and listening to her journey over these past nearly 52 weeks. So very excited to get to where we are today to do about our year check-in, shall we say.
Yes, a year check-in. So I just want to remind myself and everyone, I started this because obviously I had a history with farming and a passion for it. It's kind of always been in me. I don't know if I talked about this on the last episode, but I was thinking back when I used to visit, my grandparents lived out in Ridge, Lake Panamoka on Long Island, east of here, kind of by Calverton. And my grandmother had the most beautiful flower garden. She grew all sorts of flowers and vegetables, tomatoes. And I loved visiting her, and I loved her walking me through the garden and just telling me what everything was and the flowers, and we would cut flowers together. And sometimes I forget about those moments, but those are such pivotal moments that are so vivid in my memories of visiting them. So it's always been something that I've been passionate about on many levels for many different reasons. And I think some of those reasons have come out through the 52 weeks of interviews, which we'll talk about. But one of the things is I do want to get back into farming and agriculture in some capacity. And I want to be able to use all the skills that I've accumulated over the many years of my life and apply them in whatever it is. And, usually I would always connect with people and interview people and try to get to know, just have discussions with them, for over coffee or wherever. But instead, I said, why not do it in a podcast platform? Because number one, I did not know much about podcasting. As a marketer, I needed to know more about podcasting. And what better way to learn something is by doing it. So not only was this an experience about learning about what's going on with agriculture and farming in the world today, especially the economics around it, what people are successful at, what's not working anymore, but also, how does podcasting work and all the intricacies of the technology behind podcasting, the editing, all putting music to it. Like I learned so much, actually to the point where you came to me with your friends. Did you want to say?
We're getting ready to start.
Yes.
Yes. So, Jen, I have background in terrestrial radio for many, many years. And so do two colleagues of mine. We do some voiceover work, some radio work, and we wanted to do a pivot into podcasting. And the three of us are clueless. They're like, does anybody know anything about podcasting? We knew radio. We have no clue. I said, I know somebody who does. And we met with Jen. And our first endeavor is going to actually be April 30th, which is in a few weeks.
Wow.
We've been doing research and learning. We'll probably be a complete hot mess because it's going to be the first time in action. But our first stab at it from Jen's direction, because we knew nothing going into this blindly. And we, members of my team there, listen to Jen's podcast. I listen, and we're excited to, you make it look easy. I know because I know you that you were new to this a year ago, but if I didn't know, I would not have a clue. So we're excited to take the information that we've learned from your experience that you kind of imparted onto us and try our journey. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it's exciting. I was honored to be able to be asked to talk to you guys, and I didn't realize how much I knew from all the trials and tribulations of learning how to do this. And believe me, I have not perfected it in any way, shape, or form, but it's fun, and it's another learning process. So let's talk about 52 weeks of interviews. I know I looked at all of my interviews and I put them into categories for my own organization, and, just thinking about what I learned. And just overall, it wasn't just about farming. There were so many life lessons. Uh, there were couples that just inspired me about, with their connection and just their ability to work together so passionately. So there were so many different aspects of learning that came out of this and inspiration. It wasn't just about farming, and hence, farming is not just about, the act of farming either. There's so much more to it. So where do you want to start?
Okay. So I love that I have this perspective because for you, you're recapping your journey. But for me, I've also been a listener throughout your journey. So I'm curious to kind of take some things of that I've experienced on the listening end and see, as you who experienced it as the host, how you can recap this. So one theme I wanted to start with is food access. It's a really important topic. It came across in several episodes of your podcast the past 52 weeks. So what are some things you can tell us about on that topic that come to mind that you have learned that you did not know going into this?
It's funny. Hobbs Farm was all about that. And not that I didn't understand the impact, obviously, I understood the impact of what Anne had created, but I think I understand it even more. And, after speaking to a few people in particular, and some who are not published yet, they're coming up. But, Gianni, from the executive director at Carolina Human Reinvestment in South Carolina, what he is doing, he talked a lot about taking that leap of faith. I mean, he wasn't even an American citizen. He came from Africa. He completely came over here as an educated man, but then had to get re-educated and reestablish himself. He ended up in this executive director position in an organization that needed a lot of work. And he has created a very powerful and impactful food access organization in South Carolina. And the conversation with him resonates with me. And in addition, he took me on a tour through his greenhouse, where they're doing a lot of aquaponics and growing. And that was a lot of fun because everything was just green. And I love being in a greenhouse, especially in the winter. And I know I was talking to him on a day, it was like literally like 20 degrees in South Carolina, which is highly unusual. So
Right.
I just actually, Jennifer Johnson from Gaining Ground, she runs a nonprofit food access organization, a farm basically in Massachusetts. And again, another amazing person and organization that involves over 3,800 volunteers. And they basically grow food and grow community together. And again, just so inspirational. And then there's Kristen from Heart and Soil Collective, who's making healthy food accessible to seniors. And also she has a winter soup program. And again, these are people that some of them are really finding ways to help farmers, so to fund farmers while they're feeding people in need. So there's this dual purpose going on. A few of the ones that are coming up that are not published yet, that really, again, all of these collectively have impacted me significantly to the point where the whole food access, food adversity, these topics are resonating deeply with me. And I don't know how I want to impact this, but I feel like there's something here and I'm just tapping into it right now. Shalom Farms in Virginia, I just had that interview today and I can't wait to publish it. They're doing amazing work. And then there's a gentleman, Jim Sanders, who runs Wildflower Lane Farm in North Carolina. He's actually from Long Island, but he lived most of his life in North Carolina. He's an environmentalist and farmer, and he basically came up with a model. He worked with a nonprofit that was a distribution. So the nonprofit called Table would buy their produce from a wholesaler or a retailer. Basically, he convinced them to shift their funds to him, and he would grow all the food that they were purchasing. So they were getting like it was like some 10 times more produce for the same amount of money by shifting it to him. So he's created this model that's now been replicated among all these, to all these farmers and among a bunch of nonprofits down in his area. So I actually interviewed him, and then I really wanted to interview the nonprofit executive director who took the risk
Right.
on trusting him and saw the opportunity. So I actually had an interview with her too. All of those are coming up, but they really just, this whole topic I think is so important, more now than ever before, but it's something that we really need to look at. And I think what the most important thing here is that I feel like we really need to look at what Jim Sanders did. He's, and Table, and how basically we're using our local resources. We're funding
Right.
our local resources. We're not going on to, to big wholesalers and retailers and just funding them, but we're funding local farms while we're feeding people in need. What better combination, especially when it comes to American business? So
Absolutely.
food access is definitely a hot topic for me, and I am going to continue to explore that going forward.
I love that. And especially, you don't talk about perspective. You don't realize how fortunate you may be in your own life, because if you're not in a position that you have to think about food access, even if you think that you could be down on your luck in one way or another, you really, it's very humbling, and it makes you want to do more when you realize that you're in a position to do so and how many people are not. So I think it's very important you touch on that. So this is interesting. You're the first person many years ago. I love food. I love sweet things. I love chocolate. And I only thought of chocolate as what I can buy in the food store, which is processed and who knows what it's actually made of. I really didn't know much about it. I just knew I liked chocolate. You were the first person many years ago who first let me know, well, this is what chocolate really is. I never actually even thought about where it came from. I didn't think about how it was grown. And I never thought about chocolate and travel being an actual industry until you introduced me to that a long time ago. I know you've touched upon it throughout the last 52 weeks. So tell us more about what you've learned that you didn't know already on that subject.
That I didn't know already. I knew a lot. So, but again, chocolate is one of those first of all, it is all about the agriculture for me. The travels I've done, it was really about learning about how things are grown, because again, you can take anything we eat, and for the most part, it usually comes from a plant at some point.
Right.
What's been added to it is a whole different story, but the core of it is from a plant that's grown somewhere in the world. And chocolate is from the cacao tree. It's so interesting to learn about it. So I interviewed Jeff from Mocha Origins about, they have a chocolate and coffee business, but they also have these origin trips to all the places they source their cacao from and their coffee, if you want to learn more about coffee. And he was my first interview. I've known Jeff for a bunch of years because I love his chocolate. I love the sustainability part of his business. He really cares. They care about how things are grown, where they're grown. They care about the people that are growing it. So I just love his passion. I was very grateful that he was my first interview for this, for this journey. I spoke about my trip to Belize and the howler monkeys and cotton. Yep. I had an interview with Cotton Tree Lodge, which is where I stayed in the middle of the jungle. I won't go too much into that. I also interviewed Lylette Russell. She was the owner of Crayfish Bay Organics in Grenada. Again, I traveled there, stayed at her Airbnb, ate her amazing food right from the land, watched her make chocolate right from the cacao bean. And what an experience. That's where I also learned about woofing, which we'll talk about later. There were woofers actually at her place. Then I interviewed my dear friend Waldo about his family who owns an organic cacao farm in the Dominican Republic, which he never had told me about until like a few months before we ended up traveling there. And I also did an interview with Good Now Farms, which is a bean to bar maker in Massachusetts. And what's nice about them is they do factory tours. And again, so passionate. They're well traveled. They really care about the sourcing part. Chocolate right now, cacao, is at an all-time high as far as purchasing the beans. And there's the economy. It's the price of chocolate is going to go up among everything else in the world, but this was starting to happen before everything else was going up. And there's many reasons for this. One of the people I didn't mention who I interviewed was my daughter. Anna went on one of the Mocha Origins trips to Mexico. It was focused on coffee, but they actually did have a visit to a cacao farm as well. She had an amazing experience, and I interviewed her about that experience. And she also wrote a blog on my website, myheartbeatfarms.com website, about the cocoa economy and what's going on with it. Obviously, it's a little outdated. Things are changing at a rapid pace, but it's so important to know where our food comes from and to just realize that everything we're consuming is from a plant that a farmer is growing somewhere in the world. And we need to stay connected to that. And the story of chocolate is a really good example of that process, of that connection, of the challenges and the importance of addressing some of these challenges. So yeah, chocolate will always be near and dear to my heart. And I'm also, out of this whole thing, I've been working with Dory from Berkshire Farm Sanctuary, and we are actually going to host some chocolate tastings at her farmhouse as a fundraiser over the course of the summer. So we're going to be launching that soon with a few dates. So I'm going to help facilitate that and bring in chocolate from all these amazing places that I have talked about and visited.
I love that. And a really cool, which we'll talk about later on, that makes it a really cool, destination location as well. So very, very cool.
Yes.
I love it.
That's the key. That's the key. Yep.
Love it. Another theme that you spoke about, no offense to the guys in the farming world, but you and I are women. Now, I'm not much of, I'm a gardener, I like to say. I love the idea of farm to table. I have 40-foot nails, so I'm kind of useless, but I do garden. So I don't know if I'm a woman farmer, but a woman gardener. So women in farming, and you also touched upon women in farming, a lot of them who also went on to write phenomenal books. So talk a little bit about the women in farming that you've met through this journey and some of them who have actually documented their journey in books, how they got to that, what you learned from that, and how it inspired you.
Yeah. Yes. And there are women weaved throughout the 52 weeks, but some of these women specifically like you said, have written books and definitely focused on women in this, rural farming world. One of my early interviews was with a woman named Shelby Watson Hampton, who one of her books is Grace, Grit, and Lipstick. And her family actually owns a vineyard that was converted from a farm. I think it was a nursery at the time. We talk about it in the interview. But she also, in addition to her book and working at the vineyard, she also has a job where she helps farmers. So I don't know the exact title, but so she is become such a presence for women in farming, women in rural communities who are in the farming world. So I know she's doing all sorts of things right now to help work with women and influence women. So someone to definitely keep an eye on. Another very inspirational woman, Jane Lee Rankin, she wrote a book called Farm Family. And what an adventure she was on as a single mom. She now owns Apple Hill Farm in North Carolina. And it's a story about family and love and life and farming and alpacas. And she has this connection to alpacas, and I learned so much, and I really, really enjoyed the interview with her. Just a very inspirational woman. I believe she has her own podcast now too as well, but her book is definitely just just a fun book. It's not just about farming, it's about life.
Right.
And then Tracy Mitchell Griggs, she's a mid-Atlantic agritourism expert. Tracy feeds me so many amazing contacts, and many of which I've interviewed just because they're so compelling. And it's everything from, she has contact like in every facet of agritourism, from, traditional farming and flowers to craft beer and seafood even, and, and all over the world. She's given me contacts in Alaska and all the way to the East Coast. And so, and she's a very good writer, and she writes a lot about agritourism more online. She actually led me to Dr. Allison Feeney, who was my craft beer and apple cider interview, who also wrote a book about craft beer in Pennsylvania. I'm not a beer drinker, and I apple cider I have had and I do enjoy, but I'm not a beer drinker, and I learned so much about beer. And one of the things that stood, from that interview, one of the things I took away is I never realized the impact, like water. Water is the biggest ingredient in beer. And we
Right.
all know that when you have water at your house versus someone down the block, or then in someone in another state, the water tastes different. Well,
Absolutely.
these craft beer people have to consider the water that they're using. And it seems so obvious. And I was like, wow, I never really thought
Right.
about that. And she went into using local hops versus, hops from different areas, and barley. And I didn't know. I just didn't know. It's such an intricate scientific process that, we take it for granted. We just, sometimes just want to have a beer. She also focused on the community aspect of craft beer, how these breweries bring people together more
Right.
so than the, alcohol thing. It was just like people are brought together through these breweries. And it was just a really good interview. I really enjoyed her insight into all of this. And then one person she didn't write a book yet, I'll say. Renee Wilson, who runs the farmyard, again, a young woman entrepreneur, farmer, who is just making her mark. She basically, her revenue comes from a lot of, certain services, especially with horses, but all of her farm experiences for kids are free. And she's really, she's just inspiring so many kids. And great interview. There were a few surprises during that interview, but I'll leave that alone for now.
One thing I thought was interesting too, when you mentioned, when something jogs your mind, I didn't even think about it. When you mentioned about the craft beer, it's true, that brings people together. And a friend of mine from high school has a hop farm out east, actually. He's a farmer. And he does very well. And I totally forgot about till now. I'll have to introduce you guys so you
Yes.
can talk on your journey. But Marcos does this. And one thing he told me at our high school reunion a few years ago is he loves doing it because it brings people together in the industry he's in. And he's also growing things in farming. So you just reminded me of that. And
Yeah, I want to know more because hops, there's a lot of intricacies to that process. It's just really interesting. All of it's
yeah,
interesting. And that's the thing. Everything you grow has a process, has its challenges, so some of these farms that are growing, multiple, like over 40 vegetables or fruits, everything has there's intricacy to every one of those.
it's so
And
true.
then within each category, like if you take a tomato, there's so many varieties of tomatoes, and then you have to get to know each variety
Right.
as a grower. So there's so much involved. We don't realize that when we're consuming food, we're not thinking about that. We're not
No,
thinking about that farmer. And that farmer is they're not just out there farming. There's so much science involved, and
absolutely.
so many other components of farming that people don't think about.
And talk about showing up for work. Their job is so important. We don't eat if they don't do their job, if they don't show up. And I think we lose sight of that. Some of the, like, me, for example, I work in promotional products. If I don't show up for one day, the world will keep turning. But people physically are not getting, food and cannot function without farmers and what they do. And it's such an important thing we take for granted. And I love how you break it down and get into all these different aspects of it. So the layperson like me has a whole new appreciation of how important this is for the world we live in. Absolutely. So now, a memory I think a lot of us have as a child, I was dragged to it and wound up coming home red. Pick your own. One thing, I mean, I have memories of just coming home with red hands and red face, going to the strawberry farms. And also even the you pick pumpkins, but I mean, really the strawberries, that was a lot of my childhood. I feel like growing up on Long Island, my parents were kind of like, this is what we do. And we did it. And I really never thought much about it. And, as a teenager, we went because it was fun. And I loved to eat the strawberries and the other things. But I really never thought too much about the you pick industry. I actually didn't really think it was an industry. As somebody as a layperson, I just was like, oh, I guess, farms have this on Long Island. Okay. But in listening to you and learning, it's an actual aspect of the industry. So do tell us more.
It's interesting you brought that up. When I used to go take the kids apple picking out east on Long Island, I used to think, wow, these poor apples, these poor trees, because I didn't want my kids doing that, but they were kids. So I sometimes wonder, I used to wonder, okay, would this be worth it for a farmer to have this kind of abuse to their plants and trees? Do the economics work in the end? And, I believe they do. And a lot of farmers who have those big U-picks usually have areas that they dedicate to U-pick that take more abuse. And then they have their specialty areas for their CSAs or their markets or whatever they're doing with their berries or their apples or peaches or whatever. Pick your own is some, again, I worry about that for farmers. But then I interviewed Megan Neubauer, and her book is called Pick Your Own. And I have to say, I've recommended this book more than any other book, that I have read, and interviewed someone over the last 52 weeks. And it was funny, I just gave it to someone who is starting a new farm, and he was focused on farmers markets. And I was like, no, so I said to him, not now, maybe several years ago that would have worked, but not now. I said, and it has to be the right farm and the right location. Megan puts together criteria, and her model is, she sells tickets to it's an experience. So, people come, they buy, it's a low ticket. It's like $5 or $10 to reserve your spot. And then, whatever you buy, you pay for. But she does vegetables and fruits, but she does very specific ones because she's done this by trial and error. And she figured out which do people enjoy picking the most and buying, because there are certain things you think people might want to pick. And then she said they wouldn't, and then they would never buy it. So she would never make any money off of it. So she's perfected this. And she also does it. She happens to be in Texas, but she does it over an 8-week period. That is her season. And it is like when you think of that as a farmer, you're like, wow. And I'm not saying there's obviously a lot of growing time before that, but her whole thing was, I'm a farmer. I want to be farming. I don't want to be harvesting, washing, going off the farm to these markets, growing over 40 things for a CSA. She tried all that, and it was not profitable. And if you add in labor to any of that, it will never be profitable, which most farmers don't even integrate the labor. And that's a problem because their time is money. But Pick Your Own, she has just developed such a solid model for this. And like I said, there is criteria. Not every farm, you can't do this on every farm. There are rules, there's parking, there's things you have to consider. But she breaks it down in such a simple way that you could quickly evaluate, or when you're looking at property, use this criteria to look at where your land should be and where you want to maybe buy a farm or lease a farm or whatever. So I highly recommend this book to anyone considering farming in general, and specifically Pick Your Own, or looking at viable business models that could actually make good money. So love Megan.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. And I love that in her case, she's kind of proven less is more. I think a lot of times in society, we think, oh no, I need all these things, but proven point, not always.
Yep.
Depends on what you're doing. And I love that.
Yep.
So something I did not know a clue about until I heard it from you is art and agriculture, how the two intersect. I did not think that I would have never put the two in the same category or the same sentence. So tell us about why they should be in the same sentence.
Yes. This surprised me too. It's not that it wasn't on my radar, but it became, I interviewed Will Culler from Clemson University, and he took over and then expanded this art and ag tour in South Carolina. And I have to say, and actually, he's the reason I met Gianni. He CC'd me on an email about Gianni because Gianni wanted to be part of the Art and Ag tour. So Will CC'd me. I don't know if it was a mistake or not, but it was a good mistake if it was. I think it was intentional, but I'm not sure to this day. So so then I got to meet Gianni and all the amazing, food access stuff he's doing. So basically, they create tours in all these counties in South Carolina, and they're free to the public. But on specific weekends or weeks, they actually have tours going on in specific counties. And this thing has expanded like wildfire. I mean, it is amazing. I believe, and I'm not positive, I was told that it might be breaking off from Clemson and actually becoming its own nonprofit, but I'm not sure.
Wow.
But they're integrating art and ag in so many different ways. Like you might go to a farm and then there's an art show there, or they're not. It's not just that though. There's just there's so many ways that they're integrating it, and there's so many different types of visits. The counties kind of take ownership of it, and it's facilitated through Will's team. But it opened my eyes to so many things. And it also made me think about how farming is its own art. We really need to think about that. And then from there, I interviewed, this was another amazing interview, Worm Farm Institute in Wisconsin. I interviewed Jay Salinas. It's Donna and Jay run the business. They're located in Wisconsin, but they spend part of their year in Mexico. And what's important to say about that is they really have bridged agriculture and art in very unique ways. The interview goes into so many different ways. They bring artists to their farm and they work on their farm while they're doing an art project. But one of the biggest things they have is they have this art tour that's you drive to different farms on this tour. And there are art installations, like big art installations done by artists on the farms.
I love that.
And what's amazing, what's happened is they told me, Jay went into explaining that the farmers have embraced this. At first it was, like they were like, what is it? What do you want me to do? But the farmers have embraced this to the point where those installations sometimes become permanent fixtures at the farms or are morphed in some way to integrate into the farms. So it's amazing how, again, the art has been embraced in the farming world. When they're in Mexico, they've been working on synergies, again, with their farm and with, artists in Mexico and farmers in Mexico. So they just are really, the bridges that they're creating in the world are pretty amazing. Two amazing people. I was so inspired by them. And then I want to highlight also Lori Baker she grows tea in Maryland. You don't grow tea in Maryland.
When I heard that, I was like, what?
Yes. And honestly, I didn't really know what tea was and what plant it actually comes from, and that there is a very distinct herbal teas are not teas, actually. So that's a whole thing for the interview. You have to listen to it because I didn't know that. She owns Heron's Meadow Farm, and BLTs is the tea company, and the tea grows at the farm. And she also happens to be an artist. She's a potter, and she loves making teapots and mugs. And I just sat there on the phone like, okay, well, what a perfect bridge to your teas,
Absolutely.
what a perfect gift. So, and I got to say, Lori, I have to mention this because, again, when I talked at the beginning, I said There've been so many life lessons people who have inspired me in so many different ways. Lori has overcome 2 kidney transplants, one recent, and is still like going strong. And the second transplant was actually her husband. It's her second husband. Her husband was a match,
That's
and he
amazing.
gave her a kidney. And I don't remember if it was 2023 or 2024. It was fairly recently. This all happened. The second one happened. So she's just an amazing inspiration on so many levels.
Absolutely. And what I also found interesting for her is that only 90 US farms grow tea. I would have never thought that was the case. I mean, I'm an avid tea drinker and coffee, and I would have just thought it was prevalent. I never put it, like you said,
No.
regarding the plants, I never put any thought into how tea was grown. I just consume it. So little things like that make you realize how much you don't know and how important it is, these little things that people are doing that really makes the world go round and
Yep.
feeds the world. So really inspiring story there too. Farm to table. I know that's kind of a buzz phrase sometimes too. I'll be the person who will Google like, oh, it's a farm to table restaurant.
And then
And
you always ask me, and I'm like,
yeah,
well,
I'm like, is this really farm to table or is just Google telling me that? And I'm trying. I want to do that, but I don't know enough about it. And I've also learned from listening to you what it's a whole nother ball game, and it could be even more accessible. So tell us about
Yeah.
some farm to table experiences that you've learned about throughout your journey, and some things that you might think that, where it could go in the future based on
Right.
what you've learned so far.
Farm to table is a big buzzword right now. And I do think it's so important for people to have an experience, because if this is what gets you to a farm and gets you to learn about and make that connection to where your food is coming from, then go for it.
Right.
I met and the thing is, it's being done on so many different levels, and I think it needs to even be expanded even more. And I think there's some opportunity here for some people. One of the earlier interviews I had was with Rachel Jones from Locavore Farm, and she has a program called Dine on the Land. And she has a very interesting background. She spent a lot of time out of America. And one of the things that she realized was that food was way more important in other countries. Dining with people, connecting with people while eating was so much more important everywhere else except for here in America. And she wanted to bring that back. So she has an interesting story. Her and her husband had jobs and they ended up buying a farm. And she basically does Dine on the Land. She brings 100 guests basically to a farm to table dinner. And the sun sets, and they're outside of Chicago, so they're very flat land and stuff.
Right.
But what she's created is beautiful. I mean, it's the entire experience. It's something I do want to. I definitely want to visit her and have that experience. But she spoke a lot. It was a very good interview because she talked a lot about the economics of farming and how tough it is. And the challenge is also when you're doing something like this, there's a lot of things you have to learn about what's allowed. Commercial kitchen stuff, like there's a lot of health department stuff, Department of Agriculture. You need to figure out how can you do this properly. So there's a lot to consider, and she broke that down a lot, and I appreciated her honesty and transparency around that. Another person that I interviewed, Relish, Donna Del Rey from Relish Culinary Adventures. She's doing something similar. She doesn't have a farm, but she goes out to farms and different locations and does farm to table experiences. She also does all sorts of other experiences and takes people on, mushroom hikes and foraging and stuff, and really cool stuff. But she's out in California in wine country.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, so she works with all sorts of farmers. One is a peach farm that I interviewed and creates these experiences for people. And then I more recently interviewed Chef Madison and Farmer Jamie from Dancing Greens Farm in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. 2 young women who were in a master's program in Italy, and that had to do with food and the economics around food and food access. And they created this vision and have made it happen in the Berkshires. So they do farm to table at their farm. And I know they're in a hiatus right now. They're actually looking for a bigger property and means to do this because it got so popular so quickly. And which is awesome to hear. So I think with farm to table, the one thing is, there are companies like there's another company out there called Outstanding in the Field, and he's an artist, I think, by trade, but he does these like several hundred person outdoor dining experiences at all types of venues, including farms. Many of the farms I've interviewed have actually hosted an Outstanding in the Field dinner. Those price points are extremely high. You are getting, obviously, everything for your money, I'm sure. But I would like to see different versions of this. Like, it doesn't have to be a 5-course meal or a 10-course meal.
Right.
It can be something simpler. It could be a brunch. It could be a pizza or soup on the farm. Anything to bring people to experience farm to table and appreciate farm to table, I think is important. So I think farms should think about, the different levels out there of what people can afford and kind of diversify their offerings. In addition, how can we invite the people who can't afford this to the table as well? So I think we need to think a little bit about that. All of these amazing food access farms, how do we create a place for them at the table that, so that it's not just a certain demographic that's experiencing this, that they are, they're able to experience this as well. So these are just things that I've been thinking about when I think about all the great stuff we're doing. How do we expand that to all demographics, not just certain demographics that can afford those higher price points?
I love that. I would love to see that too. I would definitely check that out for sure.
And believe me, there are a lot of people who are doing this, that part of the money is donated to organizations and nonprofits. So I commend that 100%. Maybe that donation goes to someone to sit at that table, like maybe we reframe it a little bit, just different ideas that cross my mind.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
You just heard part 1 of my 2-part first-year podcast journey, joined by my dear friend Marisa. Part 2 is coming next. I hope our Agri-Tourist Podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agri-tourist.com. Until next time. So I was recently listening to one of the Grounded in Maine podcasts produced by Amy Fagan. The podcast is an open conversation about being mindful about how we show up in the world. It's focused on sustainability and how sustainability impacts every part of our life. What are some of the most important takeaways that people will get from your podcast?
One of the things that I hope that people will take away from the podcast is encouragement. Like, I want them to not feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars to be part of the solution, because, there are a lot of sustainable, things that say sustainability or sustainable, like solar panels or organic cotton and stuff like that. Like, some things are just more expensive because they have that tagline. That phrase or whatever. But there are so many ways that you can be sustainable. You just have to be a little bit creative. And so I'm putting out all these ideas that what people are doing, just to put the thought out there that we can all be part of it without going broke.
So how can people find your podcast?
My podcast is wherever podcasts are found. It is just called Grounded in Maine. I also have my Instagram is where I am most active, and the Instagram handle is Grounded in Maine Podcasts.